All right, welcome to a Way Out book study. Almost couldn't remember the name, but I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic.
And my name is Howard Eber. I am a recovered alcoholic as well.
So I think we're on our fourth or fifth week of We Agnostics, maybe sixth week, I don't know. But you know, that's what we do here. We try to get you to understand this stuff as much as hopefully try to explain it, and we're on page 53, and the paragraph starts off with like what this, We Agnostics is about. It says logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance that we are given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses and draw conclusions. I mean, it's interesting because we examine our thinking in this and try to draw conclusions based on, where it takes you. Um, and it says that is one of man's manifest attributes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach of inner how do you say that? Inner pretension
Interpretation.
interpretation. Okay, I don't know why I didn't understand that when I looked at it. Hence, we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it is more sane and logical to believe that not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we throw up our hands in doubt and said we don't know when we become alcoholics crushed by a self-imposed crisis. um hold, hold on right there before we get into that sentence.
Yeah.
Howard, you want to comment on anything we read so
Yeah.
far in that
Yeah.
paragraph?
This paragraph contains a section that for a long time threw me. Beginning where it says, hence we're at pains, to the end of the paragraph. I really wasn't that comfortable with what I thought it was about. So I started asking around, and I think I've come to some clarity on it. And let me tell you what I found about it. It says, uh, it begins by saying, the paragraph begins by talking about logic and reason and being able to examine the evidence of our senses and draw conclusions. And when he says, hence we're at great pains to tell you, I think what he's saying is, as a consequence of this logic, of this reasoning, we find it very difficult to tell why we think our current faith is more reasonable than our past doubts. Why we think it now makes more sense to believe than to not believe as we used to. Why we say our old way of thinking was soft and mushy. When we gave up the fight, and that's, I think, what this is about. When we gave up the fight, we stopped resisting, we stopped doubting, and said, I don't know. We're saying we have hope, that we believe, because that's what hope is belief. And saying I don't know just means that I have doubt, but I also believe. So I don't know if that clarifies it, but it certainly did for me. That, not that stuff about, well, to believe. Why do we think the old way was easier to explain than the new way? It just confused me. But I think that's what it comes down to.
All right, so we're getting some deep
Paragraph is
stuff
more
here.
fun anyway.
When we became alcoholics crushed by a self-imposed crisis, there's nothing, fearful of facing fear, but it's like this is telling me it's a self-imposed crisis, you know. It's self, and my interpretation is the misdirected instincts we see in the third column of step four, sorry. But it wasn't, so it's not my upbringing. It's not what people necessarily did to me. It's no one's fault. It's not God's fault. Self-imposed crisis. These misdirected instincts cause our problems. So elimination of self, it must be the goal. So it says when we became alcoholic crushed by self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fiercely face the proposition um, that either God is everything or else he's nothing. God either is, isn't, was our choice to be. Before we read further, actually, let's go to page 59 really quick. Page 59, half measures avails nothing. Withstood a turning point. We had to ask his protection and care with complete abandon. So this is so we're at the turning point of that part in the book. Um, Either God is everything or he's nothing. God is or isn't. What is our choice to be? That's the turning point. And are you ready? I guess what he's saying here is, are you ready to make this choice that God is everything or is nothing? God is or isn't. There's it doesn't look like there's any middle ground in between that. There's no leeway. You know, it's not saying God kind of is. A lot of mistakes tons of people make when seeking God is they reach this fork in the road where they stand there. God either is, this way or that way. They stand there in the middle of the road and nothing changes because they're just standing. They want God to grow upon you. This is a seeking program, you know, and that's the truth. Howard, do you want to comment on that little tidbit?
Yeah, this paragraph, incidentally, I left something out in the previous paragraph. It says something about logic is great stuff and reason. Logic is the agnostic's higher power. And then he makes a statement about agnostically inclined, those of us who are agnostically inclined. Well, if you want to know your current level of agnosticism, ask yourself, what are you struggling with right now? What do you have doubts about right now?
Right.
That's your current area of unmanageability. But the paragraph that Steve just read, I like to spend a little bit more time on because I think this paragraph gives us instructions for step two. These are the instructions for step two. This is the proposition of the second step. And let me break it down a little bit. It says, when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self imposed crisis. Okay. What is a self imposed crisis? Steve mentioned it. A self imposed crisis is the failure of our current way of life. It's not because of other factors, it's because of us. So the self imposed crisis that we find ourselves in is the failure of our current way of living. And then it says, we could not postpone or evade. Well, that just means if we continue that way, we're doomed, right? We couldn't postpone it anymore. We couldn't evade it anymore. If we continue the way we're going in this self imposed crisis, we're doomed. And then is one of the musts. When you say we had to, that's a must. A lot of different ways of saying must. But here's the third part of it. Again, self imposed crisis is the failure of our current way of life. We could not postpone or evade, just means if we continue the way we're going, we're doomed. And we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. We had to fearlessly face, in the words of that Bill used in the 12 and 12 on page 24, he said, we had to face under the lash of alcoholism. We had to turn to God. Under the lash of alcoholism, we had to turn to God. So I think that's what he's talking about here, that we had to fearlessly face this proposition that God is everything or he's nothing. God either is or he isn't. And here's the killer. What was our choice to be? The answer to that question is going to be the foundation upon which we base every future decision and therefore every action we take. All our future thoughts, all our future actions, in other words, all of our lives and all of our wills is going to be based on the foundation of that, the answer to that question. God either is or he isn't. Am I still in the center of my life? What's in it for me? What do I get out of it? Why should I do it? Me, the AA opera. Or am I putting God in the center of my life and basing my decisions on that as a central point and not me as a central point. This paragraph is so important. It really is. Um, Steve, did you want to go on any more with that?
No, I was just gonna say, I was lost when it came to trying to understand God. I mean, priests try to explain it to me, nuns, my parents. I try to fake it till I make it, but let's see what it says here. Arrived at this point, we squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't induct the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason towards the desired shore of faith. So, we were at the shore. I mean, we're dying and bleeding at that shore, and we can stay bleeding or we can cross the bridge, which is steps 4 through 9. And, it's kind of like, the faith part is, remember Indiana Jones, when he comes to a bridge that's not there, but he has faith that is, and he takes a step forward onto that bridge and the bridge appears. The map said it was there, and our map says the same thing. That's why we got to have faith. Howard, do you want to comment on that at all? Or?
Um, well, I had a graphic I was going to put up, but you said something a second ago that I wanted to mention, and I completely got out of my head. So I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to just
Okay.
hold my place for a minute. Oh, I know what it is. When you said something about finding God, Mark Houston said we have to stop trying to find God because we don't find God with our brain. He said to find God, you have to be out of your mind because you don't use that organ to find God. You find God with an entirely different organ. And every time I hear people talk about finding God, I'm thinking Mark Houston. We don't find God with our mind. We find God with another organ. You got to be out of your mind to find God. Steve?
Says the outline and the promise of the new land had brought luster, which is a glow, to tired eyes. Remember, eyes are the windows of the soul, and fresh courage to flagging spirits. I mean, like weak spirits, lost spirits. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason. That's last mile. We did not like to lose our support. Howard, do you want to comment on that?
Well, one of the things that I thought when I first read this is that you're telling me that I have to stop trying to reason things out, that reason is what gets me in trouble. So I have to stop reasoning. And what I found when he says that we've been leaning too heavily on reason and we didn't like to lose our supporters, we've come to rely on reason as our only resource. And that's the problem. We've relied on it to solve our problems. We base our decisions and our actions on our ability to reason things out and figure out the correct course of each situation. We still do that. Not telling us not to do that, but he's telling us we now have a guiding principle upon which to base our reasoning. See end of previous paragraph. God either is or he isn't. That the principle that we're going to base our reasoning on is the principle of the existence of a higher power. Same thing as God is or he isn't. We're going to base all of our decisions on that. We're going to continue to use reasoning because God gave us a brain to use. We're not being told to stop reasoning, but we're going to have a foundation now for that reason. And that foundation is the principle of the existence of a higher power.
All right. That was natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, we had not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith. Or did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in the ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we have been faithful, objectively faithful to the God of reason. So, in one way or another, we discover that faith had been involved all along. You want to comment on that, Howard?
Yeah. In this particular case where he says we've been faithfully, abjectly faithful, and incidentally, abjectly, according to a 1939 dictionary, means that something that is worthless, something that's despicable, something now it comes to mean utterly hopeless, something that's slavish or servile, but that's not the point I want to make. We've been faithful, abjectly faithful to the God of reason. And in this case, reason to me means self, that we've been faithful to the God of self. Now we're going to, again, go back to that question 2 paragraphs ago. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? And here now it's a God of reason. Are we going to rely on self or are we going to rely on God?
Right.
3 paragraphs in a row, he brings up the same thing, different ways. He can be so creative sometimes. It's just amazing.
Because we found too that we've been worshipers. What a state of mental goose flesh. I love that. That used to bring on. Had we not uh variously worshiped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves. I mean, we know we can make a list of stuff we worshiped, of course, drugs, alcohol, but you know, people say I never worship stuff, and I always tell them, how about resentment? How about fear? Look what it says here. It says, and then with a better motive, have we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? Who who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, and these worships have to be with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw it at last. Were we not these things, the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. And another, one for another, we had been living by faith and little else. And I mean, the truth is, people walk in the rooms all the time and they have no idea what faith is. And, I always tell people, I look at faith is very similar to, the knowing, but there's no doubt in faith and knowing, where, belief is handed to you. And I always ask people, sponsees, and do you want, belief or do you want knowledge? It's a big difference. Do you want belief or do you want faith? Because faith will always get knocked out of your hands. I'm not faith. I mean, let's say belief. Howard, you want to comment on that?
Yeah. First, I mentioned before there was a graphic I wanted to put up because we had talked about this flimsy reed, and I just put a copy of it in the chat, but let me put it up here in the screen share because we've been talking about going from this flimsy reed, from a flimsy reed of belief over the bridge of reason to the solid shore of faith, as Steve mentioned. We go from belief. Belief is hope. When I came in here, people told me, you got to have faith, and you're not going to make it. Well, I didn't have faith when I got here. I had hope. That's all I had. And I didn't realize that hope was belief. You see, belief and hope are what we start with. Faith we develop over a period of time as a result of seeing the results of our beliefs. Based on the belief, we take action. Based on the action, we get results. Based on the results, I no longer believe, I know. That means I have faith, because faith is defined as knowledge, surety, certainty, and experience. And I don't have that in the beginning. All I have is belief. And as good addicts and alcoholics, we want more. We want assurances at the beginning. We want guarantees at the beginning. And we don't get that. That's what faith is. We get belief. We get hope in the beginning. And based on the hope, we take action. And based on the action, we get results. And the result is faith. So I just wanted to spend a moment on that because I just think it's so important. But the paragraph that Steve just read to me means if I only had more money, things would be okay. If I only had fill in the blank, things would be okay. And I pursued those things as solutions to the problems of my life. And when I didn't get those things, I blamed you. You interfered with my plans and I didn't get what I wanted to get. So it's your fault that I am where I am and I'm struggling the way that I am. And when I did occasionally get some of those things and it failed to satisfy me and it failed to solve all of my problems, it just added to my depression and feeling of meaningless and futility. I was a believer. I had faith all along. You know, did you ever call ahead to the liquor store to find out if they had alcohol? No, you had faith. You knew they had alcohol. Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. I was a victim. I was in one form or another. I'd been living by faith. I just didn't see it the same way. Steve?
Says imagine life without faith, where nothing, where nothing left but pure reason. It wouldn't be life. Basically what it would be Groundhog Day. Same day over and over again. When you live in faith, you know, I have a plate that was my grandfather's. He was a Freemason and he had a plate and he gave me, and it says each day a new discovery. And that's what faith is, each day a new discovery. It's where life's rich and beautiful. But we believe in life. Of course we did. We cannot prove life in the sense that we could prove a straight line to the shortest distance between 2 points. Yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons creating out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling on to destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seem more intelligent than that. At least so the chemist said. Howard?
Yeah, just the way you described the void, that's the opposite of hope. That's the anti-hope. The whirls on to nothing. So no, I don't have anything else to add to that right now.
I also want to throw in what Howard was talking about a minute ago, was he was talking about, all these things he searched for outside, but where were those things outside himself? And we look for God outside ourselves. We look for drugs outside ourselves, right? And that's what an insane mind does. So let's see what else it says here. Hence, we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable, though it emanate from our best minds. What about people who proved that man could never fly? Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do you want to comment a little paragraph, or do you want to keep going?
Once again, I'm going to use the word reason and interchange it to self, because reason is our self guiding our decisions. So when he says we saw that self isn't everything, neither is reason, as most of us use it. That's a self-deprecating comment. He didn't say as most people use it, as most of you use it. He's counting himself in on that reasoning and figuring things out myself is not entirely dependable. And I recognize that includes me too. So when he says, as most of us use it, It's just a self-deprecating comment. And again, what the people who proved that man could never fly? Science, mathematics, all proved that man couldn't fly, but the Wright brothers, these bicycle mechanics,
Hmm.
proved that we could because their minds weren't fettered by the things that the scientists and mathematicians were fettered by. And remember, we talked about this last week, the things that block us from God. We saw on page 48, block us from spiritual growth. On 48, we saw it was obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. And then on 51, we're adding superstition, tradition, and fixed ideas. And on this page, we're going to add three more: calamity, pomp, and worship. Those are 9 things that block us from spiritual growth. The Wright brothers didn't have any of that blocking them. They had a childish belief that they could do this thing. And then just before we get into the rest of this page, some of you who know me know that I sometimes joke about the fact that I think this chapter, We Agnostics, should be retitled. The title of it should be Where's Waldo? Because isn't that what the chapter is about? If you know Where's Waldo, right? It's that giant drawing with all these little figures, and you got to find the Waldo in that. Well, isn't that what We Agnostics is about? And we're about to find out where Waldo is. Well,
Exactly.
let Steve tell you.
So, yet we've been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation, that means freedom, from this world. People who rose above their problems, but check this out, because of doubt. They said God made these things possible, and well, he smiled. We've seen spiritual release, but like our tell us it wasn't true. Later on in the book, it says we can laugh at those things spiritual as a way of weakness. That's what we get when we have faith. Is we laugh at the opposite direction. But we didn't know any better. So this page has absolutely changed my life, saved my life. Actually, we're fooling ourselves. For deep down, every man, woman, child is a fundamental idea of God. That means like a principle or foundation of idea of God. It may be obscured, and that means by obscured means covered up or shoved inside yourself, whatever. By calamity, which is chaos and drama. By pomp, pride. The pride we talk about in this book is false pride, where I'm constantly worrying about what people think about me, trying to wear that mask, and you know by worship of other things. We know we worshiped, but in some form or another, it was there. For faith and a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human life are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was part of our makeup, just as much as feelings we have for a friend. And, I mentioned this before, you know, my sponsor asked me, what do you look for in a friend? Because he heard my child conception of God, and God was punishing, angry, vengeful, mean, wasn't there, and all this stuff. That was my child conception of God. And he took a different approach. He said, what are your feelings you have for a friend? I said, loyalty, respect, unselfishness, always there, grateful, calm, open-minded, forgiving. And he looked at me and goes, you'll never find that in a friend. Someone's going to fall short. But what if you could find that with God? And that's all he said. Howard, you want to comment on that
Yeah,
paragraph?
that last line about faith and a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power are facts as old as man himself. Miraculous demonstrations, that's the result. That's the result of belief, and action produces that result. And if you keep your place on this page for a moment, turn to page 153 for a second. Page 153, the first paragraph, about 4 lines down, it says, since these things have happened among us, those miraculous results, they can happen with you. Should you wish them above all else and be willing to make use of our experience, not our advice, our experience, we are sure they will come. The age of miracles is still with us. Our own recovery proves that seeing other alcoholics restored to happy, useful, productive lives by adopting this spiritual basis for their lives should be a good enough reason for any of us to give it a try. You know, with most people, it's normal people. Seeing is believing, right? You've heard that expression. Not so with us. With us, believing is seeing. And if we see it in other people, we can believe it happens for us too. See?
So this is one of the most important paragraphs in this book.
Yeah.
So this is the condition of finding God. Sometimes we had to church fearlessly, but he was there. Fearlessly doesn't mean no fear. It means the ability to walk through fear, so not let a fear stop you. So look what it says. He was as much as fact as we were. We found the great reality, capitalized, deep down within us. And the last analysis, after looking everywhere else, it is only there where he may be found. It was so with us. So this great reality is capitalized. Talking about God deep down within us. And you know what amazed me about this is Bill just explained God in one sentence, you could say there. And during my lifetime, how long it takes someone to explain God? You know, the guys in the suits that come to your door and stuff, and you know, it takes people, you know, they never get to the point. And you know, we were looking for God in the wrong place. And you know, the second I read that God was, you know, within me, the child conception of God felt, you know, it was shattered. It was like a ball going through the, you know, the glass window. Um, you know, I had something I thought, you know, I would never have. You know, I mean, I spent my whole life looking for God. I sought God in religion, yoga, meditation, therapy, spirituality, meetings, and more meetings, and alcohol and drugs. And you know, all I wanted was peace of mind. Well, that you know, all that stuff I did, it all it did was trim away a few branches. But after years of trying, I finally accepted I had a you know spiritual problem. Thus began this you know greatest journey of my life. But you know the dark truth is an insane mind. I mentioned this earlier. Will always try to you know seek God outside themselves. They will never seek within. So, you know, the last place they overlook is within. And I had to lose everything, run out of options until I finally looked within. Because remember, the 12 steps are an inner journey, right? And that's, you know, the 12 steps are not about gaining anything. They're about losing stuff so I can be closer to God within. All these resentments went where? Within me. All these fears were I held my within me. You know, God has been deep down you know, within you since the day you were born. You know, God never left our side. God never abandoned us. You know, we're never separated from God. We were just blocked by resentment and, you know, repressed anger and you know, justified resentments and all that stuff like that. Shame. And when you're connected within to have, you know, when you're connected within, you found the door to God. And there is nowhere else where it can be found because we're hardwired for God. And then I explained a few weeks ago about the acorn of the oak tree, how the acorn, you know, has all the information within it to survive. And maybe we're no different than that. And we too can grow in the image and likeness of our creator, even if we don't look like it. But the truth is, rather than God being somewhere out here, we're a portion, you know, he's a portion of us. There's no place that God is not. You know, so God must be in you. Howard, do you want to comment on that little paragraph?
Yeah, I love that Steve just pointed that out, that um I kind of missed for some time when he said that that faith in some kind of God was part of our makeup. What I missed was part of our makeup is telling me it's innate. I'm born with it. Just like the capacity to love, I didn't have to be taught how to love. It's innate. It takes something to bring it out. It took Kathy to bring it out for me, but it is inside of me. And we're born with it, as Steve said. And the end of the paragraph, if you remember, let's go back for a second to page 45, if you will. Indulge me for a second. Page 45, paragraph 1 says, lack of power, that was our dilemma. The last sentence in that paragraph says, but where and how were we to find this power? And when we read that, if you remember, I added a third question, not just where and not just how, but when. And as we go through this chapter, we find, where do we find God? We just saw it, page 55. How were we to find God? Page 46. Tell us, lay aside prejudice, be willing, and search, take action. And when? When were we to find this power? And Steve just mentioned it, in the final analysis. When we've looked everywhere else, when I've tried everything else, when I've tried every method of self-help, read every book about self-help, tried vitamins, tried exercise, tried just going to meetings alone. When I tried all of those things, that's when I was able to find God. When did I find God? When I stopped trying to find him in other places. He's right in here. Thanks.
You know, I mean, all the creatures, I mean, all religions talk about, you know, all religions have so much in common, and but the main thing is you have the golden rule, which is love, you know, love all, or you could say treat us with the way you want to be treated. And you have forgiveness, but then all the other religions also, and philosophies, talk about some type of, you know, spirit that's within us, some type of energy force that can guide us, you know, because every creature, you know, has a spirit, but it's largely been left unexamined. Therefore, we become accustomed to taking the spirit for granted because our our main focus is on the physical world, you know, the external world, leaving you that makes us limited and restricted, you know. Therefore, you know, um, this, you know, the spiritual, instead of, you know, waiting for, you know, looking for God, we our instincts, you know, push us there. You know, the big question is, how do we go beyond belief and experience God? How do we know God? We have the steps. The steps will take us there, you know. So thanks to the, you know, the steps, that the spirit becomes our primary focus in life. Howard, you want to comment on that?
No, you got
Oh,
it. Just
I got to take a call, Howard. Go ahead.
go ahead. It was so with us. We're talking about, again, the 100 or 40 or 70. The people Bill was referring to on the first page when he said we are 100 men and women who have recovered. And it's the purpose of this book to show you how we have done that. So whenever he says we or he says us, he's not referring to you and I or Steve and everybody. He's talking about the originals, the founders. All right, he's on the phone. So let's take a look at the next paragraph. We can only clear the ground a bit. And here's a great promise. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, old ideas, enables you to think honestly, what does that mean? That means be willing, encourages you to search diligently within yourself. Then if you can, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. That is the cast iron guarantee of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That with this attitude, you cannot fail. Please notice there's no asterisk at the end of that sentence. It doesn't say, there's no disclaimer. It doesn't say individual results may vary. It is a cast iron promise that if you have that right attitude, you sweep away prejudice, you search diligently within yourself, you will find that power. That's a cast iron guarantee. And then he backs it with the statement, the consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. In other words, the awareness of a God of your own understanding is guaranteed to come to you if you keep an open mind. Lay aside prejudice, lay aside prejudice. That word is used 6 times in this chapter. We just saw it for the 6th time. And that may not be a lot, but It's a lot for one chapter. Lay aside prejudice, that the consciousness of our belief is sure to come to you. The God of your own understanding is guaranteed to come to you if you keep an open mind. Once again, cast iron guarantee. Thanks.
So the conscious of your belief should come to you. The awareness of God is should, because of action 49, belief becomes the reality. Consciousness, knowing God, and you know, God comes to the quiet mind, and God can enter a mind or anything that's filled with conflict. I don't think God um, is interested in him loving of us loving him as much as he's interested, in us, loving each other. And I'm going to read a quote by Thomas Merton. And Thomas Merton said, when we enter this region, he's talking about conscious belief, um, which we had never suspected. The old world of our senses is now the one that seems strange, remote, and unbelievable, while the new world seems familiar and obvious. So the old world, what did it have? Illusions that were out here to drive ourselves. The new world is familiar and obvious because we've always had it because it's within us. I mean, today I realize God is if God's not the center of my life, something else is. you know with us is we have this retreat place we can go to, and that's why it's so beautiful. I mean, that we have he reminds us in step 11, but to only go in step 11, the other steps are my flashlight in step 11. you know if I try to meditate with God and go within and look and get the directions I need, and I have a bunch of resentments, all of a sudden it's dark again. And it's where we can discover we can face life like effortlessly, you know where we have inner, strength, direction, guidance, inspiration, and love for all the beauty is. I mean, if you, I live not far from San Francisco, and I always ask my friend this question: if you're driving by San Francisco, my friend drives by there every day by the ocean, and some of them will say, "Oh, the ocean stinks. It's dirty and stuff like that." But there's some people that have the utmost respect for the ocean, the diver, because the diver doesn't judge the surface; they've gone inside and they see the beauty of the ocean. They know the beauty is all there. And once you learn how to to enter that temple, of yourself, we can take it wherever we go. You know, when you understand what you really are, you will know we're not human beings trying to have a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings trying to have a human experience. You know, we are the essence of greatness. And that's the best way to look at it. I want to tell you guys a story really quick that my grandma used to tell, and I haven't shared this a few times in here. My grandma had a very unique way of explaining to me when about the spirit within. It was the only time I heard anyone do it. I didn't understand what she was saying, but what she would say, she'd tell the story of Snow White, and the Wicked Witch says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" And Mirror says Snow White. Now, Snow White represents our own spiritual nature within, a spiritual nature that has been covered up and destroyed, whatever, obscured. So all the ego, which is the Wicked Witch, can do is put the spirit to sleep. So the Wicked Witch takes the poison apple and gives it to Snow White, and she eats the apple and goes what? Goes to sleep. But does not die, does not die. And who awakens Snow White? The Prince of Peace. It is only, a long, it wasn't long, it took me years to understand that story, but today I know it. I understand that it's that kiss of higher conscience that awakens us to God. So the question is not God is or isn't. How can God not be? Because God is already within us. People always say, I got to get closer to God. You hear that in meetings all the time. How can you get closer to God? That's like saying you need to get closer to your own heart. God's already within us. But how can how could God not be? Because it's already within us, but perhaps just asleep. That's the moral of that. Maybe God's just asleep. Howard, you want to run through this
Yeah,
story?
yeah, just I mentioned before, what Mark Houston said about we got to stop talking about looking for God, but it's also a process. It's not a process of letting God in. And I hear that all the time. I got to let God in. I got to let God in. I don't think that's what it's about because God is innate. This process is about letting God out. It's about clearing the way away the debris that has accumulated on our soul as a result of a life spent on self, making decisions based on self. We got to clear away that debris so God can get out. It's not about letting God in. As we've been talking in this whole page, God is in us all anyway. So it's not about letting him in. He's there. Like Steve said, it's about saying getting close to your own heart. It's part of you. It's already there. What we have to do is let that power out by removing the obstacles in his path. And that's why we do our inventory. And it reminds me of an expression. I don't know where I heard it for the first time, but the line is that the power within me is far greater than any fear before me. The power within me is far greater than any fear within me. I like that. Steve, you want to go on?
Yeah, so we got this. I think this is story is Fitz Mayo.
Oh yeah. Oh, you want me to get into that a bit, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
The bio.
Hmm.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me put this up. I forgot. You asked me that a minute ago and I didn't do it. Um, this story that we're about to read, this is Fitz Mayo. We've learned about Fitzmayo way, 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 way back in the doctor's opinion. Remember, the doctor talked about two examples that when he thinks back and he wants to remember successes, he talks about Hank Parkhurst's story and he talks about Fitzmayo. Fitzmayo is the guy who you may recall decided to kill himself by locking himself in a deserted barn, deciding to drink himself to death. He was the third person to recover at Towns Hospital. Bill worked with Hank first, and then he worked with Fitz Mayo. His story, Our Southern Friend, was in the first edition. Um, Unfortunately, uh, Fitz died in 1943 at the age of 46 from cancer. He died sober. But the point is, I think it's a shame he never got to see Alcoholics Anonymous develop into what it has developed because he died in 43. The Jack Alexander article hadn't been written. And there's another important thing about Fitzmayo, and then I'll leave it to Steve to tell you the story here, is that when they decided to get a title for the book, this book that we're reading, the title was going to be A Way Out by Alcoholics Anonymous. And Bill asked Fitz if he would go to the Library of Congress because, see, Fitz lived in West Virginia, closer to Washington, D.C. than Bill was in New York. And he asked him to go to the Library of Congress and see how many books are out there with a title something like A Way Out. Now, he came back with a number. Now, I've heard people say he came back with 12 steps, 12 traditions, 12 concepts. Ooh, something special about 12. I don't buy that. I've heard people say he came back and said there were 36 of them. The traditions, the steps, and the concepts equal 36. Ooh, I don't buy that either. I haven't read anywhere what that exact number is because it's unimportant. We're looking for significance where there is none. The significant point is that there were other books using a title like that, and Bill didn't want to be competitive. So Fitz suggested, why don't we just call the book Alcoholics Anonymous? And Bill liked it, and Dr. Bob liked it, and it stuck. So they called the book Alcoholics Anonymous. as a result of Fitzmayo's suggestion. And just, I love the names in this book. Some of these names are the greatest. This one takes the cake. His real name was John Henry Fitzhugh Mayo.
Hmm.
That's great. That's even better than Ebby, who was Quackenbush. This is John Henry Fitzhugh Mayo. What a great handle to have to walk around with. No wonder why they called him Fitz. Um, I think that's the rest of it. I'll let you talk about in the story. That's all.
You want me to read the story straight through
Yeah, go ahead.
so we can get through this? In this book, you'll read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dynamic, convincing, and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attends church school, where he became a rebellious at what he thought was an overdose of religious education, my experience. For years thereafter, he was dogged by troubles and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. Sounds familiar. These calamities in his intimate family embedded and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, even more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of destruction. One night, when confined in the hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic whom had known a spiritual experience. Our friend's gorge, means anger, rose out as he barely cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't been there for me." But later on, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I have known are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, sudden and profound, boom, a great thought came. It crowded all the thoughts, crowded out all else. Sorry. Who are you to say there is no God? This man recounts he trembled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by the conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty of a majestic, great tide of flood. The barriers he had built through years were swept away. For the first time, he lived in the conscious companionship with his Creator. This was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No later vesicle had shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away. That very night, years ago, it disappeared. Save for brief moments of temptation, he thought of drink has never returned, and at such a time of great revulsion has risen in him. Seemingly, he could not drink, even if he would. God restored his sanity. What is this about? Howard, you want to comment on that before we?
Uh, I got so much to comment on that. Let's finish the story now, but give me a couple of minutes at the beginning of next week's meeting to
Yeah,
go
yeah,
on
yeah.
pages. That's all.
What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his Maker. Then he knew. Even so, even so has God restored him, restores all their right minds. To this man, the revolutionary was sudden spiritual experience. Some of us that grow more slowly, spiritual awakening. But he has come to all who have earnestly sought him. Hmm. You know, when he drew near to us, he disclosed himself to us. Wow. You can comment on that now, Howard. We still
Oh,
got time. We
well,
we can
let
go over a little bit.
let me just start at the last line. Um, uh, one of the things that I said at the beginning of this chapter was that one of the beauties of it, the genius of We Agnostics, is it doesn't try to prove that there is a God. It doesn't try to tell me anything like that. What it does is it gives me just enough new information so that I can consider it, so that I can ponder it, so I might be willing to acknowledge that there is this power. And if I do that, then God just may prove to me that there is a God. And that's the way this chapter ends. When we draw near to him, he disclosed himself to us. And he says that again in the so-called ninth step promises, which I like to call the ninth step observances, the fourth dimension observances, where he says we suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Again, if we have an open mind, the consciousness of our belief is sure to come to us. In other words, God just might prove to us that there is a God. All we have to do, open the door. I'll see you next week.
So I'm gonna actually one of my friends who's no longer with us used to close with this story, and I'm gonna close with Agnostics this story. Um, and I love it. There is a man he's lost in the desert, wandering around for days, nearly dead of dehydration, and he sees a shack off in the distance, and not knowing maybe it's a mirage, he goes there anyway. And when he arrives at the shack, he discovers a water pump inside, and he instantly started pumping it frantically to get the water out. And nothing comes out. And he's frustrated, and he goes to the floor and starts weeping. And while on the floor, he sees six empty water jugs, and next to them was a jug filled with water, with a note that said, pour all the water from the pump, pour all this water into the pump to prime it. If you do this, you will get all the water you need to survive. But please, to, uh, do not forget to fill the bottle when you're done. And our friends, so he's faced with this dilemma. Should he follow the instructions or entrust a note and pour the water into the pump and have the water he needs to survive, or he can just drink the bottle of water that's up on the wall, and he might make it a couple miles. And he thought, should I risk it? If I pour the water in the pump, it might not might be the last water I ever see. What if the pump didn't work? The man decided to take a leap of faith, and his hands are shaking, and he pours the water into the pump, closes his eyes, and says a prayer and starts pumping. First, nothing comes out, and he gets scared, but then and he keeps pumping, and it's going faster, and all of a sudden, the water comes out. And he laid under that pump and drank it for a few minutes, and then he filled the empty six jugs, which would get him where he needed to be. And then he found a map up on the wall that actually said civilization's this way. See, that's why he knows how many jugs there are. So he then filled the bottle, put it back on the shelf, and under the original note, he wrote, "Believe it works." And that's why I try to hope that people believe it works. Many of us have faced situations like that where we have two options, life or death, where there's doubt and uncertainty whether this new world or will it work. Do we seek the power? Do we not? Remember what says to be doomed to alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis, not always easy our terms to face. Do we take the easy way out, or we take the hard road of seeking God? And luckily we made that choice. Is then we can tell someone, believe it works. And see if it works. Next week we'll start how it works.
Yeah. Well, before we do that, I want to tell you a little bit about what I've learned from Fitzmayo's story, and then we'll get to how it works.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording.